Welcome back to Meghan and Harry Tales. I'm thrilled you've tuned in for today's exciting update. I'm your host, Kelly. Prince Harry has once again teamed up with renowned social psychologist Jonathan Haidt for a fascinating deep dive into social media and mental health. This intimate conversation, part of the Archwell Foundation's 2024 Insight session, touches on crucial issues that many parents face today. The session highlights appear in a fresh report, putting youth voices at the heart of the tech impact debate. Stay tuned right here because I'll be sharing the most powerful takeaways from their discussion. Plus, you won't want to miss hearing Harry and Jonathan's compelling thoughts on how parenting intersects with today's digital age. Grab a seat and watch.
Jonathan Haidt, very nice to meet you on this World Mental Health Day.
Oh, Prince Harry, what an honor to meet you.
Thank you for spending time with me and having this discussion about your book, The Anxious Generation, which, funny enough, aligns very well with the insight sessions that we've been doing with young people in numerous different countries. Perhaps the best way to start is for the people that haven't heard of your book or haven't even had a chance to read your book. What is the anxious generation about, and what is the clearest, most important message and takeaway from it?
So the anxious generation is about a big change that happened for young people born after 1995. There's never been such a sharp generational shift. Those who were born in the late 90s and afterwards, it turned out when they hit puberty, they had very, very high rates of anxiety, depression, self-harm, and suicide. All of those went up. And they all went up right around 2010 to 2012, in that region, everything goes up. Not just in America, but all over the English-speaking world and in Scandinavia and some other parts as well. And then what happens is between 2010 and 2015, the technology changes such that young people, they trade in their flip phones for smartphones. And now, with a front-facing camera, high-speed internet, 1 million apps that are competing with each other to hook kids' attention. And so if you went through puberty in the early 2010s, your brain was influenced in early puberty in ways that set you up for worse mental health, especially depression, anxiety. Whereas the millennials were basically done with puberty. They didn't get all this stuff until they were in college, until they were at least 18. So they went through that critical period of puberty and they came out okay. So the anxious generation is helping us understand the incredible destructive force of this transformation of childhood between 2010 and 2015, and then what we can do now to stop that from happening and to help those who already have been through it.
So in many cases, the smartphone has and is stealing young people's childhood.
Exactly. We are overprotecting our children in the real world and underprotecting them online. And both of those moves are mistakes. They're bad for development.
For social media companies, there's a lot of finger pointing. It's very easy for social media companies to point the finger at parents and say, well, this is down to you, this is down to your parenting.
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
Yeah. So if there were some parents who were getting this wrong and most parents were getting it right, then I'd be very receptive to that argument. But once kids get a phone and social media, the rest of family life turns into a fight over screen time. And this is happening everywhere. This is happening in Silicon Valley, where the parents know what's going on. In fact, in Silicon Valley, you're much more likely to find parents who say, no, you cannot have this because we know how bad it is. Why do we give our 10-year-olds a phone? The main reason is because everyone else did. We don't want our daughter to be the only one who's left out. I'm facing this now with my 14-year-old daughter on Snapchat. So the tech companies put us in a bind, and then they're trying to blame us for what they did. A few companies, 3 or 4 companies, largely own childhood now. They have far more influence on our children than we do, at least in terms of the amount of time they can spend influencing. They vastly exceed the power of parents. And then they want to say, oh, but it's your fault. No, it's their fault.
I've said in the past that, at least to a certain extent, families and parents used to know that your kids were safe under your own roof.
Yeah.
They would go walking to school, coming back from school, go to the shops, whatever it was. And no matter what age, of course, they get to a certain age where they can do those walks themselves. And then that once they're under your own roof, that they are presumably safe.
Yeah, that's right.
We can't say that anymore.
No, that's right.
A lot of the parents that we've spoken to, some of the stories are obviously incredibly harrowing, but they also talk about the banning of phones and the fact that the conflict that creates between parents and their children themselves. And obviously a lot of parents, give their kids phones at a younger age to keep them safe. right? It's a double-edged sword. They want them to have their phone at school in case of an emergency, but once like any kid, if you have your phone, even if you're told you're not allowed to download that app or you're not allowed to, kids have a way of working around. But at the same time, you have the tech companies say that they can't verify age because of privacy concerns.
Well, first, in terms of safety, I understand the parental need for safety. So if you're actually sending your kid out independently to go around town, to walk over to friends' houses, well, that's great. I applaud you. If you want to give your kid a phone so that if anything goes wrong, they can call you, great, give them a phone. Just don't give them a supercomputer connected to everyone in the world. Like, they don't need that. The millennials had flip phones. They went through puberty with flip phones to call each other, text each other, meet up. They came out fine. Gen Z went through puberty with a supercomputer, blocking out almost everything else in life. Everything goes down. Much less time with friends, much less sunlight, many fewer books, many fewer hobbies. You take almost everything out of childhood, you replace it with this and a bunch of million short videos. It's not much of a childhood.
Talk to me about the statistics that are all over your book and they're probably ingrained in your brain when it comes to suicide, depression, lack of sleep amongst adolescents, and the differences between girls and boys and the effect that social media is having to them.
Yeah. For older teen girls, I think it's around 80% in America. Wow. But for the younger teen girls, it's something like 180%. It's nearly tripling. So 10 to 14-year-old girls did not used to cut themselves before 2010. They did not used to kill themselves. The rates were extremely low. Now, they're still low, thank God. But they are, for the overall suicide rate is up 50% for American teens since 2010. And it's up, I think, 120% for younger teens. So this is not a change in self-report. This is a change in behavior. Something is driving our kids mad, and especially the girls. Actually, the boys in the long run are doing worse. The story for girls does focus on social media. Now, of course, they also lose all this time together talking, even talking on the telephone would be good. So the girls' story is about what it does to their social networks. The boys' story is very different. Boys are a little more physical. They need to run around. They need to climb and build things and break things. Boys are just a little more rambunctious. And so when you suppress them and you say no more recess and shorter recess and sit in your chair, that's really bad for them. Boys have been checking out of school for decades. Richard Reeves' work shows this in his book of Boys and Men. And as they were checking out from school, girls have been going up, boys are going down since the 80s. But the internet comes in and the boys go to it first. The boys love it. They love computers. So boys are getting hooked on video games and their programming, which is good. Programming is great. And their mental health is stable in the 90s and early 2000s. But once you get to the high-speed internet, the amazing multiplayer games, which are much more addictive than, I remember when Pong came out, like a ping pong game. If you check in on the kids at 14, the boys are doing better. The girls, a lot of them are very anxious. They're very diminished. They're unhappy. The boys are playing video games. They're actually enjoying those. But for that reason, they're failing to do anything that will turn them into men. They're not having the growing or toughening experiences. They're not developing the social skill. This is what a lot of employers say. The boys they won't make eye contact. So the boys are really having their social development interfered with. The loss of the play-based childhood and the move on to a phone-based childhood might be doing more harm to the boys than the girls.
This is one of the problems that I have. I mean, we're both dads. These apps have been specifically designed to hook and keep children online for as long as possible.
That's right.
Mindless scrolling. And during that scrolling, they have content that is pushed to them, content that they wouldn't otherwise go looking for, to keep them online for longer. And some of that content ends up suggesting suicide.
That's right.
So how do we fix this at the source?
Well, so fixing at the source means we recognize that social media should be in a category with casino gambling, smoking cigarettes, buying a gun, driving a car. There are a lot of things in this world where we've decided, you know what, these are things that adults have a right to do, but they're really bad for kids. And it's actually pretty simple. When do we have age limits? When do we say that kids can't do something? Parents could see this happening. I think the discomfort was beginning to register in 2019. This was all baked in before COVID. Nobody can tell me, oh, well, it's COVID. No, this was...
COVID accelerated it.
COVID accelerated it, yeah. What kids really needed in 2019, I was saying this back then, was they need a lot more time outside playing independently, and they need a lot less time on their screens. And that's especially when TikTok roars in to become the center of younger teens' lives, and that's really been catastrophic.
from a parental standpoint, we want the best for our kids. And social media, we know to a large extent, is giving an outlet, an added resource to kids that perhaps don't feel comfortable coming to us to talk about their issues and their troubles and their worries. And therefore, it's far easier, as we know, even for adults, to go and speak to complete strangers. So kids online will be feeling more connected with complete strangers on social media. So how do you, if you're a parent that you know that your kid is getting good out of social media, how do you have that conversation with them, or how do you not keep tabs, but perhaps certainly from the Parents Network and the group of parents that we have now formed, from their perspective, the advice that they've been given is to follow your children. So you at least have a good understanding of, a better understanding of what world that they are in and what they're being exposed to on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So, and what you're saying there is to some extent one of Meta's favorite talking points, which is that social media is a lifeline for LGBTQ kids, for kids from marginalized communities. And that's just not true. What's true is that the internet was great for them. The internet solved all these problems in the 90s. If you're a gay kid, you're not out to anyone in a rural part of America or England, the internet was amazing. You could find information, you could find people who are like you, and you could communicate. There were a lot of ways, there were a lot of groups that you could talk to. When social media changes so that it's no longer even about just me connecting to you, it's now about the news feed and an algorithm-driven news feed that sends content to you. This is not what they need. If you have any special interest, you can find that with Google. You don't need an algorithm to feed you stuff.
Well, now most of these kids are going to TikTok because they want to see someone of their own generation.
Yeah, that's right. So it's a myth that this stuff is a lifeline. It's a myth that this stuff is good for kids. Connectivity often is, but there are different kinds of connectivity. The research, I think, is very clear. When kids have a best friend, or I think especially a small group, that's super fun. They generally do well. When kids don't have a close friend or close group, they're much less likely to do well. When you have 300 connections, you don't have time for anyone. You're less likely to have a best friend. So when social media takes over our kids' social lives in the early 2010s, it's not like, oh, now they've got lots of friends. No, it's like now they have no room for a best friend. They just have all these shallow connections. It's not good for them.
Like any amount of research and data, especially given this topic, there's been criticisms and pushback. Do you want to talk to some of that?
I'd love to. So there are about 6 or 8 researchers who strongly disagree with me, and they say that there's no evidence of causality. There's no evidence that this stuff is causing harm. Sure, kids got on social media at the same time that the depression rates went up, but that's just a coincidence. It's just a correlation. And they say the correlations are very small. Well, the correlations are actually much bigger when you look at social media and girls. What happens is they often sort of bury the effects by looking at all digital media use and boys and girls. But when you look at the correlation between hours of use of social media and girls, you do find clear correlations that are substantially larger. More importantly, there are a few dozen experiments where you have random assignment of subjects to a condition that does allow you to infer causality. So if you take kids off of social media for 3 weeks or longer, in every study we found, and there's about 15 of those, in every single study, they get better. Their mental health improves. Now, it's mostly done with college students. There's not that many because it's harder to work with preteens. But, but the claim that I only have correlational evidence is just flat out false. I've gathered all the experiments I can find, and all of the experiments that go for 2 or 3 weeks or longer, they show benefits to getting off. And the ones where they get kids off for 1 day, those backfire. Of course they do. If you're addicted and you get rid of your phone for 1 day, you're anxious the first day. So what some researchers have done is they just merge all the studies together and they say, look, overall there's no benefit. No, if you keep the kid off to get past withdrawal effects, there's a benefit. So that's the game. That's the difference between correlation and causation. There's evidence of causation.
But we also hear that from the kids. As I said, the insight sessions
That's right.
that we're having, like no one from these companies is actually speaking to to the children.
Well, they are, as we know from Meta's study, the one that Frances Haugen leaked. They commissioned a qualitative study of teens in the US and the UK, and a quote was something like, teens blame Instagram for making body image problems and social comparison worse. This response was consistent and unbidden, something like that. Like, they didn't ask the question, but in these open-ended sessions, these girls especially in both of our countries are saying, yeah, Instagram really is messing me up. So that's another kind of evidence. Evidence isn't just experiments in a lab. If the teens themselves see the harm, and I challenge anyone, find me stories of teens who got a smartphone and social media, and their lives just flowered, and they were healthier and happier, and everything was happy. You find me stories of parents who are so glad they gave their kid a phone and social media early. They're very hard to find.
Well, that was the point I was getting at, was the fact that these companies can't find any young people to come out and speak like that. And the kids that we speak to, yes, of course, there are benefits of being connected online, but the harm that's being caused, and they recognize it as well, and they want to be part of the conversation. They want to be part of redesigning these tools, and having safety at the central part of it. How hard is that to actually do? Can they actually be fixed? Can they be changed?
Well, Meta has shown very little sign of being willing to change. They did just improve some features on Instagram. That's at least a step forward. But their business model commits them to grabbing eyeballs and never letting go. But there are many companies out there. I've been talking with Pinterest, the CEO, Bill Reddy. They just, on their own, they cut off the social features for kids under 16. They said, come to Pinterest, look for patterns, look for ideas. You're welcome to come look around. But no, we're not going to let strangers talk to you when you're 14 or 13. So companies can do this. Tech companies, some are behaving responsibly. It's really Meta, TikTok, and Snap are the three that own our children's childhood and that I think are behaving irresponsibly, and that really aren't going to reform unless they're forced to by legislation or massive parent outcry.
Optimism.
I'm extremely optimistic.
Let's be optimistic. Where is the optimism? Where is the hope? And where is the guidance? You have 4 rules in your book. Feel free to touch on those as well.
So in my book, I propose 4 norms by which we break out of these collective action traps, and if we work together, it's actually easy to do. If you're the only parent who's not giving your kid a phone, it hurts, and it hurts your kid, and your kid is lonely. But if you can get a group to do it with you, well, then actually it's much easier and more fun. So the 4 norms are no smartphone before high school, no social media before 16, phone-free schools, and far more independence and free play in the real world. And those 4 norms, if any town or school or community that does those, I guarantee you're going to see improving mental health within 2 years, because we know these things work. We know phone-free schools make kids have more friends. They like school more. They're happier. We know that kids who get a smartphone really early turn out more depressed and anxious, more mental illness than those who got it later. So we know that these work. And I'm hopeful in the UK and Australia, you've got a lot of good legislation coming out. So I'm hopeful that if Australia, the UK, the EU are pushing for changes, ultimately Meta and Snap and TikTok are going to have to make changes.
But again, the optimism and hope piece that you're talking about and that I recognize is the fact that more and more people are standing up to these companies, parents included, parents mostly, and saying, no, this needs to change.
Not with my child. That's right. This needs to change, and it is changing. And that's really the key. We're in a new era of networks. And the few companies that figured that out first got there first and took over our child's attention. They're very hard to dislodge now. But people connecting, and I got to say, especially mothers, there's a ferocity among mothers that I'm seeing. When you threaten their children, they want to do something, and they are. So that's
the most important point. With your book, with our Parents Network, with all the other bits and pieces that people are, pouring their hearts into and pouring their time into, we are creating the awareness for the families to go, you know what? It didn't feel right. It's not right.
That's right.
And we've now got the data, the research, the conversations, and the proof points to prove to you that your gut instinct was right.
Yeah.
This is not normal.
That's right. That's what's happening all around the world. That's why we're seeing this year, 2024, is the turning point. Terrible things have happened to our kids. We see that now. I don't want to blame any parents because we didn't know 10 years ago. We didn't know. We thought, oh, the internet was marvelous. Oh, computers, it's making our kids smarter. Oh, okay, now they're on these platforms. Oh, they're sharing ideas. We all thought it was good. We were wrong, but we just didn't know. Well, now we know. And we're rising up and we're putting a stop to it.
But Lars, it is going to take a collective effort.
Yep, that's right. And that's why the more that there are organizations like Archwell and your parents group, and my organization, based at theanxiousgeneration.com, and Let Grow, which is resources for parents to help give their kids more of a play-based childhood, the more we stand up, link up, sync up, and act together, the quicker we're going to change this.
Jonathan, thank you very much. This
Harry,
has
what
been
a
an
pleasure.
enlightening conversation, and it's after a conversation, now the action needs to be deployed.
Let's go.
Let's go, he says. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
And there you have it, some key highlights from that powerful discussion. Prince Harry and Jonathan Haidt are making bold moves, advocating for no smartphones for young people until high school, no social media before age 16, phone-free schools, and encouraging more unsupervised play. It's clear they're passionate about protecting kids from the growing dangers of the digital world. What do you think of this approach? Are we, as a society, finally waking up to the real impact of technology on young minds? Kids are still developing, and stepping away from screens is essential. Plus, tech companies need to step up and partner with parents to combat the negative effects of social media. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop them in the comments below. Subscribe and share.